wish I could say the feeling began the night everything went wrong, that it arrived with a suddenness I could blame and then one day outrun. But the truth is simpler and crueler. It began long before in the small shiver that always crept over me whenever I passed a church after sundown. I learned to ignore it, like you ignore the sound inside your own ears, the soft hiss of blood moving when you press your head to the pillow at 3 in the morning. The mind can justify anything, even its warnings. Mine told me the unease was childish, a leftover superstition from my grandmother's stories. It told me the sacred cannot frighten, that the worst monsters are human and carry paperwork and smiles. It told me many things until one night it ran out of excuses. I am not a theologian. I am only a man who has seen something. Still, I will risk the sin of interpretation. Buildings remember. The old timber remembers hands that raised it. Stone remembers the weight of knees and the tear salt that soaked its grains. Bells remember names. We walk into a church and say it is only architecture. The cusp of an arch here, a vault there, a nave that gathers footsteps into a hush. But when the sun falls behind the apse and the hollow of the choir darkens, the building becomes what it truly is, a vessel that has held 1,000 hungers and 1,000 debts. If those debts are left unpaid, they do not disappear. They ferment. Every city has the rumor that holiness and harm share a wall. In mine, priests bless babies in the morning and bury strangers in the afternoon. By night, the doors are locked and the candles gutter behind stained glass, and something settles over the courtyard like a veil. The old women call it the hour when saints sleep. The men at the cantina say the hour belongs to wolves. The doctors blame circadian collapse, the hallucinations of the graveyard shift. None of them are entirely wrong. Exhaustion makes the eyes believe what the soul already fears. I used to cross myself reflexively when the bells rang for Compline. I don't anymore. Habit is a fragile shield, and once broken, it cannot be mended by going through the motion. Yet I still remember the way my grandmother's voice lowered on certain words. "Do not linger after dark," she would say. "Do not answer if a voice calls from behind the altar. If you pray, let your breath be small. God can hear without shouting. Others hear the shout." Others. She didn't name them. Neither will I. Names are invitations. This month, people asked for stories about sects, about the congregations that hide in plain sight, about the way an innocent ritual can be inverted until it becomes a mirror that no longer reflects heaven, but only the mouth of whatever stares back from below. I hesitated, not because I doubt such stories. I hesitated because once they are told, the listeners share the witness. Responsibility divides, yes, but so does the attention of the thing you describe. There is a comfort in silence that feels like safety. There is a cost to breaking it. I am paying now. You learn if you spend enough time inside sanctuaries that every church breathes differently at night. Some exhale incense and dust, making a smell like dried roses and old books. Others exhale stone, chalky, cool, patient as a crypt. The one in my story, San Bartolomé de las Cumbres, exhaled pine and rain and something else I could not name, the way you cannot name a note that is almost too low to hear. I did not know this the first day we arrived. That would come later when the warning had been given and I chose to ignore it. We were there for good reasons, bureaucratically pure ones. My uncle restores old buildings, temples, theaters, the occasional hacienda whose roof threatens to break under the next storm. He told me if I wanted real work as an architect, work that touched history instead of selling square meters in towers of glass, I needed to learn from places like this. I listened. I was young enough to believe apprenticeship was a pact with the past. In a sense, it is. I did not understand the past has many ambassadors. There is a psychology to isolation. to mountains that blot out the cell signal and roads that turn to slurry as soon as dusk pulls the warmth from the dirt. By late afternoon, the village already felt like an island cut loose from the map. The priest who received us was kind in the way men are kind when they require obedience. His smile was measured. His voice had the soft finality of a closed door. Before we unpacked brushes or scaffolding, he gave a single instruction. When the sun goes down, leave. The church needs its rest, he said, and a laugh caught in his throat like a fishbone. I nodded because that is what you do when someone older speaks with certainty. But I filed the warning with a dozen others, the kind that live between faith and folklore, and went about measuring cracks, tracing the ribs of the vault, tapping the plaster to find empty hums where water had hollowed the wall. Respectable work, rational work, daylight work. It keeps your mind tidy. And yet something in me kept glancing toward the sacristy door, the one that led beneath the altar. The latch had a habit of whispering against its frame as if it breathed. I told myself it was the draft. The north face opened to the forest. Cold slid down the trunks and collected at the threshold. I told myself many things. The brain is a generous liar given cause, but the door kept whispering, and my eyes kept answering. Liminal space, the anthropologists call it, the threshold where one order yields to another. I had written papers about thresholds, courtyards as social lungs, staircases as negotiations between public and private, portals as compressions that heighten awareness. None of those papers prepared me for the simple bodily knowledge that comes when you stand on a church step after sundown and feel watched from both sides. From the darkening square behind you, where people cross themselves as they hurry past, and from the nave before you, where the candles are already down to their last inch and the shadows do not mimic your movement but anticipate it. I could say I felt chosen. That would be romantic, and it would be a lie. I felt noticed. Noticing is the seed of every sect. Before they recruit you, they recognize you. Before they ask for offerings, they ask for attention. If you give it, even by accident, you have already begun to pay. What I am about to recount will stain everything that came before it. After I tell you, the church at the corner of your street will look different at night. The serene face of your favorite saint will seem too still, like an actor holding a pose. The echo of your steps on tile will feel like someone matching you half a beat behind. I am sorry for that. I am sorrier for the part of me that is not sorry at all, the part that wants this burden divided, the weight thinned by many shoulders. It began on the third evening, when the schedule fell behind and the sky turned quickly as it does in the mountains. One blink and the hills are purple. The next and everything is the color of iron. I told myself I would return for only a moment, just long enough to write down the adjustments that could save a day's labor. I told myself the priest's warning was about thieves or bats or the floorboards the old women feared. I told myself the church was only a building. I took my notebook. I took a small flashlight. I took a breath at the door, and as the bell in the tower shivered out the last light, I stepped inside. The church of San Bartolome was older than anyone alive could remember. They said it had been built on the bones of another temple, a ruin the Spaniards found when they came through the mountains centuries ago, where locals had once offered corn, blood, and breath to gods whose names were swallowed by time. Standing there that night, I could believe it. The air inside still carried the memory of smoke. I closed the door behind me, though I knew I shouldn't have. The wooden latch met the frame with a sigh, a sound far too human for wood and iron. The nave stretched ahead, immense and empty, pews arranged like ribs in the carcass of some sleeping beast. My flashlight beam wobbled along the center aisle, catching motes of dust that danced like embers suspended in the cold. For a while, everything seemed as it always did, silent, unmoving. but the silence wasn't absence. It was pressure. The longer I stayed, the more it felt like being underwater, every breath loud, the light trembling with the effort to push back the dark. I was halfway to the altar when I heard it. Not loud, never loud. It came as a murmur, a gathering of low voices somewhere below the stone floor. The first words were indistinct, a current of whispers flowing beneath the hymn of my heartbeat. My mind jumped to ordinary explanations. Maybe some of the workers had returned just like me, ignoring the priest's rule. Maybe they were finishing the scaffolding near the sacristy. I told myself this as I followed the sound. To the right of the altar was a small wooden door that led to the crypt and the storage cellar where the older relics were kept during restoration. It should have been locked. It wasn't. A faint light pulsed from the crack beneath the door, orange, unsteady like a candle breathing. My fingers hesitated on the handle. "It's nothing," I whispered, though the whisper came out thin. The door opened with a groan that echoed down the stairwell. The steps descended steeply, the walls narrowing until my shoulders brushed cold plaster on either side. The air changed, warmer but dense, scented with wax and something else, something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long before an altar. At the bottom, the corridor widened into a chamber I had never seen on the blueprints. My flashlight trembled over the outlines of old chests, broken statues, crates marked with faded diocesan seals. And there, at the far end, I saw them. 10 figures stood in a loose circle, their robes black as soot, hoods drawn so low that only the flicker of light touched the skin beneath. They were whispering in unison, words that should have been prayers but weren't. The syllables moved backward like tape rewound through a dying speaker. Between them burned a small fire, not in a brazier or pit, but directly on the stone floor. Above the fire hung a crucifix made of papier-mâché, suspended upside down from a wire. Flames licked up its legs, devouring the face of Christ from the crown downward. My breath locked in my throat. I wanted to run, but the sound, or maybe the cadence, rooted me where I stood. There was rhythm in it, and in that rhythm, something almost magnetic. It felt ancient, older than the words I knew, the kind of cadence that doesn't speak to the ear but to the spine. One of the figures turned. The hood slipped back just enough for the light to catch a familiar jawline, the faint glint of spectacles. It was him. The priest. His face was streaked with ash, his eyes alive with something fervent and wrong. For an instant, our gazes met. His mouth opened and his voice, rough with smoke, cut through the whispers. "Wait!" I didn't. Instinct tore through the trance and I bolted up the stairs. My boots slammed against the stone, each step chased by the echo of his voice shouting my name. I burst into the nave, the flashlight beam scattering wild shadows up the walls. Candles along the pews guttered as I passed, their flames bending toward me as if pulled by wind or by something following. The front doors were heavy, older than memory. I shoved them open, stumbling into the night. The cold hit me like water. I ran down the dirt path without turning back, afraid that if I did, I'd see those black figures spilling from the doorway behind me. By the time I reached the cabin where we lodged, my lungs burned. I locked the door, turned off every light, and crouched against the wall, listening to the sound of my own heart until it hurt. The forest outside whispered, branches brushing the roof, and now and then a crunch of gravel that made me think someone, or several someones, were circling the building. I didn't sleep. I watched the window until dawn, half expecting a face to appear behind the glass, a silhouette in robes, a reflection that wasn't mine. When my uncle came for me in the morning, I told him I was sick. He didn't argue. He only looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You went inside last night, didn't you?" I couldn't deny it. I told him everything, the whispers, the fire, the priest. He sighed, not surprised, only tired. "Pack your things," he said. "We're leaving. Don't speak to anyone and don't look back at that church." By midday, we were already halfway down the mountain road, the village shrinking in the mirror. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but beneath it I could still hear the echo of those reversed prayers, crawling backward through my memory. For days after we fled San Bartolome, I could still smell the smoke. It clung to my hair, my clothes, the inside of my throat, a sweetness that didn't belong to any real fire. My uncle refused to speak of it. He filled the car with the sound of the engine, as if the roar might drown out whatever words I was afraid to say. But silence doesn't erase a memory. It only lets it breed in the dark. That night in Puebla was supposed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. When I closed my eyes, I saw that papier-mâché crucifix twisting in the heat, skin bubbling and collapsing until the mouth split open, the face melting into something that looked like a scream but wasn't, more like a prayer coming undone. The circle of shadows murmured beneath it, and the words that came backward still scraped against the inside of my skull like teeth grinding stone. I tried to reason through it like a man of science. Maybe it was a syncretic rite, old indigenous ritual mistaken for blasphemy. In Mexico's highlands, you can still find remnants of pre-Hispanic worship tangled inside Catholic practice. Saints given the faces of ancient gods, prayers recited to both Christ and corn. I told myself I'd witnessed some hidden survival of that the priest was preserving a tradition misunderstood by outsiders. But the more I replayed what I saw, the less it fit that frame. There had been nothing reverent in their voices, only hunger. My uncle's silence began to scare me more than my memory. He never said a word during the long descent through the Sierra, but I saw the tendons on his neck stiffen each time we passed a shrine or heard a bell from a roadside chapel. Once we stopped to buy gas, and a boy offered to clean the windshield. When my uncle saw the small silver crucifix hanging from the boy's wrist, he pulled away so abruptly that the nozzle ripped from the tank, spilling fuel across the ground. "Uncle," I said, you're shaking." "Some places," he answered without looking at me, "should never have been built on holy ground." I didn't understand what he meant until later, when the diocese sealed the church. 2 months after we returned to the city, my uncle got a call from one of the workers who had stayed behind to collect payment. The man said the parish had vanished overnight. Doors chained, windows boarded, a sign nailed to the gate. "Cerrado hasta nuevo aviso." Closed until further notice. No one had seen the priest since that final mass. They said he left at dusk, carrying a single candle, and never came back. Rumors began to grow around the empty church. Some said it was condemned for structural danger. Others whispered of lights flickering beneath the floor at midnight, of songs without words rising through the cracks. An old woman swore she saw smoke seeping from the windows long after the fire had been put out inside. It would have been easy to call it hysteria, the folklore of frightened villagers, if not for what happened 3 nights after the church was sealed. I woke at 2:47 a.m. The room was dim, my lamp unplugged, though I hadn't touched it. Outside, a storm dragged its nails across the roof. For a moment, I thought it was only thunder, but beneath it, another sound wove through the wind. A whisper, faint and deliberate, the same reversed cadence I'd heard under the altar. I froze, every muscle taut. It came from the hallway, then from the corner of the room, then from inside my own skull. Each syllable unfolded backward, sucking the air from my lungs. When lightning flashed, I saw something on the wall opposite the bed. A shadow shaped like a man with arms outstretched. But the head hung upward, not downward. It was inverted, as if gravity had turned inside out. The next flash showed nothing there. I sat awake until morning, eyes on the corner where the shape had been. At dawn, when the rain stopped, I went to my uncle's room. He was sitting at the edge of his bed, staring at the same wall, pale as chalk. "You heard it too," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "They weren't praying to him," he said. "They were asking him to fall." The words chilled me more than the night itself. To fall. He meant Christ inverted, God descending instead of ascending. In some of the oldest heresies, that's how the world ends. The divine collapses into the dust it once raised, heaven folds into earth, and worship becomes consumption. The anthropologists call it anti-mass, a ritual inversion meant to unmake creation, to reverse the binding that holds order together. But those are theories written in safe rooms by people who have never heard words unspoken backward in the dark. After that morning, my uncle packed his tools and told the diocese he was retiring. "I've rebuilt too many churches," he said, "and I don't know who I've been building them for." I tried to move on. I took small jobs, city projects, anything that kept me in daylight. But sometimes when I pass a church and the bell rings, I feel that vibration again, the echo of a word that starts where prayer should end. And every time, without meaning to, I look up at the crucifix and imagine it upside down, burning, waiting for someone to whisper its name in reverse. 8 years passed before I heard another story like mine. By then, I had convinced myself that San Bartolome was an anomaly, a strange wound in the skin of faith that had healed itself. But evil doesn't heal, it migrates. It changes names, changes faces, and waits for someone reckless enough to look directly at it again. That someone wasn't me, not at first. It was a student named Roman. He and his 2 friends, Paulina and another boy, had been studying systems engineering at the university in Querétaro. When he first wrote to me, his message was short. "You don't know me, but I think we've seen the same thing." He was wrong. What they saw was worse. I met him once, in a cafe near the central square. He was nervous, tapping his fingers against the table, his eyes scanning the crowd as though expecting someone to walk in. His story came in fragments, each piece like a shard of glass he had to force out. I'll tell it now as he told it to me, though some parts I still wish I hadn't heard. It began as something ordinary, he said. 3 friends, a borrowed cabin in the Sierra Gorda, a plan to fix a leaking roof and spend the weekend drinking cheap beer under the stars. The road was dangerous, narrow, coiled like a snake, and the trip took longer than expected. They reached the village just before dusk. At the only store in town, while Roman and Paulina shopped for food, the other boy stayed outside to smoke. That was when he saw him. A tall man in a black shirt, black trousers, black boots polished like mirrors. His skin was pale, not just light, but colorless, the shade of paper left too long in a drawer. His hair was slicked back with oil, not a strand out of place. He didn't blink. He didn't even pretend not to stare. When the others came out, the man was gone. They joked about it on the drive back, calling him El Sepulturero, the gravedigger. But the boy said something that made Roman's laughter die in his throat. He wasn't standing on the ground. Back at the cabin, they tried to ignore the unease. They played music, unpacked the beer, and told stories until the forest around them disappeared into the dark. Around 11, a light tapping came from the roof, soft at first, like rain beginning. It grew steadier, rhythmic. They thought it was a branch or maybe a tool they'd left up there. But when they went outside, the roof was empty. Then the sound moved. From the roof to the kitchen, a faint tock, tock, tock against the cupboards. When they searched again, everything was untouched. No wind, no rats, no reason. Still, they tried to shake it off. Fear can be postponed by laughter, but only for so long. Roman said that sometime after midnight, the music died. The forest had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own blood moving. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, when he heard whispers outside the window. Dozens of voices, too far to make out words, but close enough that he could hear the breath behind them. He got up quietly and crossed to the glass. At first, he saw only trees. Then, in the spaces between them, pale shapes began to appear. Human silhouettes, thin and white as mist, standing in rows among the trunks. 10, 20, maybe more. And though they were far, their voices were clear, as if whispered right against his ear. He wanted to wake Paulina, but couldn't move. The shapes were facing the cabin now. One of them, closer than the rest, tilted its head, and he realized with horror that it was right outside the window, its face inches from the glass. He dropped to the floor, heart hammering. The noise woke Paulina. When she went to look, Roman pulled her back, but it was too late. She saw something beyond the trees, something he hadn't noticed before. At the edge of the clearing stood a wooden cross nearly 2 meters high. Around it, the pale figures had gathered. In the firelight of their torches, she saw a man, alive, naked, and silent, being nailed to the cross. He didn't scream, didn't resist. He only looked upward, as if praying to a god that wasn't listening. Paulina began to cry, frozen in the window frame. Roman shook her, but she wouldn't move. He said her tears fell without sound, as though the air itself refused to carry it. When she finally broke free, they ran for the door, dragging their friend half asleep from his bed. They didn't pack. They didn't turn off the lights. They just drove. The mountain road twisted like a serpent, and the car's headlights carved tunnels through the mist. Once, in the rearview mirror, Roman swore he saw a line of white figures standing along the curve they'd just passed. They reached the city before dawn. No one spoke for hours. Each of them sat with the same hollow stare, the same trembling hands that couldn't hold a cup of water steady. But terror doesn't stay quiet for long. It follows you home. 2 days later, Paulina got a call from her grandmother. Strangers had come to the house saying they knew her, saying she had entered where she shouldn't have, and that if she wanted her family to stay safe, she would forget everything. And then, the man in black returned. This time, he wasn't in the forest. He was standing across the street from her apartment, hands folded, waiting. When she blinked, he smiled. Paulina tried to convince herself the man wasn't real. Maybe it was a trick of exhaustion, the reflection of someone passing on the glass, or just trauma replaying itself through her nerves. But the longer she stared, the clearer he became. Immaculate black shirt, silver cufflinks glinting even under the street lamp, eyes that didn't seem to reflect light at all. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe. When a car passed between them, he was gone. The next day, she came to Roman's apartment, pale and trembling. "He knows where I live," she whispered. "He said nothing, but I felt him in my head." That night, none of them slept. The boy who had first seen the man at the store stayed over too. They locked the doors, drew the curtains, left the lights burning. Still, sometime around 3 a.m., the taps started again. Not on the roof this time, on the window pane. 3 slow knocks like knuckles on glass. They didn't dare open the curtains. Instead, they pressed themselves against the wall, listening. The knocking continued, followed by a voice, a woman's voice, singing something low and tuneless, like a lullaby in reverse. The boy couldn't stand it. He pulled the curtain back. There was no woman, only the man in the black shirt standing on the sidewalk. His mouth open, but still the song pouring out of him like the voice of someone else trapped inside his chest. He lifted a hand and pointed at the door. The lock clicked. That was when they ran. They grabbed their bags, their keys, anything they could carry. Outside, the air was dead still, as if the city itself had paused. Paulina swore the traffic lights were frozen on red all the way down the avenue. They didn't stop until they reached Roman's house, where his father, an old taxi driver, took one look at their faces and said nothing. He simply opened the door and let them in. In the morning, Roman's father found a mark on the windshield of his car. a handprint dark and greasy with 4 fingers and a thumb that bent the wrong way. When he touched it, the print smeared like ash. That day, he insisted they call Roman's uncle, the man who owned the cabin. Maybe he thought there was an explanation, something buried in the past of that place. The uncle listened quietly, smoking through the entire story. Then he said, "I told myself I'd never talk about that house again." He told them the man in black had a name once, or rather a title, El Santo. He had appeared years before when the town was still small and the roads weren't paved. He claimed to heal sickness, to bless harvests, to make businesses prosper. People brought him offerings, money, animals, even jewelry. He never charged. He only asked for loyalty, for obedience. Soon the town was rich. Trucks came from the city to bring gifts for the holy man. Then one day, El Santo vanished. The villagers said he had gone to the mountains to pray, but his followers kept meeting in secret. They said they could still hear him calling from the hills at night, asking for sacrifices to keep their fortune alive. Every month, new SUVs climbed the road to the same ridge where Roman and his friends had camped. They brought offerings and the whispering never stopped. When the uncle finished, silence filled the room. No one wanted to believe him. But as they sat there, a sound drifted from the window. A rasping female voice, the same one they'd heard that night. "We know more about you than you know yourselves. We know the day you will die, but if you stay silent, maybe we'll let you keep that date." They all heard it. The voice of a woman, dry as dust, amused. Roman froze. "That's her," he said. "That's the voice from the phone." The uncle crossed himself. "Then it's already too late." The lights flickered. A single photograph fell from the wall. Roman's mother, smiling faintly, the frame split clean across her throat. No one spoke. The air thickened with something sour, metallic. It was then that Roman's father whispered, "There are some prayers you never unhear." Later that night, when everyone had gone to their own homes, the boy, the same one who first saw the man, woke to find his television on. The screen glowed white, and a voice whispered through the static, "You don't get to leave." He unplugged the TV. It stayed on. Then the gas stove lit itself. He grabbed his phone to call the police, but the call never connected, only static. And underneath, a second voice, lower, thicker. Growling words that didn't belong to any language. The next morning, his apartment door was open. No one saw him leave. When Roman and Paulina came looking, they found a single thing on the floor, a black cufflink, engraved with the symbol of an inverted cross inside a circle. Paulina screamed when she saw it. Roman picked it up, and from that moment on, he swore he could hear a whisper every time he closed his eyes. Soft, endless, calling his name backward. That was the last time he saw her alive. After the boy disappeared, Roman and Paulina clung to one another out of fear more than friendship. They met only during the day, in crowded cafes or at the university, never alone, never after sunset. Still, the shadow of that night followed them everywhere. Paulina began having migraines, sharp flashes of light, whispers she swore came from inside the walls of her apartment. Roman, meanwhile, heard a voice that spoke only when he was about to fall asleep, a breath that said his name backward over and over like a prayer unsaid. The morning she stopped coming to class, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. He called her, but the number was disconnected. He went to her grandmother's house, and the old woman met him at the door, shaking. "They came back," she said. "2 men in black. They told me she'd gone where she belonged." That night, Roman didn't go home. He drove through the city until dawn, headlights carving tunnels through empty streets, hoping the motion would keep the whispers away. But when he finally parked, the engine still running, he saw a reflection in the rearview mirror, a man sitting in the back seat. Black shirt, white skin, smiling. Roman spun around, but the seat was empty. The smell of burnt incense filled the car, thick and sweet, the same scent I remembered from the cellar in San Bartolome. He called me the next day. I don't know how he found my number, but his voice on the phone was hoarse, cracked. "They're not gone," he said. "They're here. They never left." I told him to come see me, to explain, to breathe. But the next time I heard from him was a week later in a different voice entirely. A woman's. "Roman won't be playing with you anymore," she said. I could hear laughter behind her, the scrape of fingernails against a microphone. Then the call cut out. Roman's father found him that same night. The door was locked from the inside. The lights were off and all the windows sealed with black cloth. On the floor lay a circle of salt broken in one place, as if something had stepped through. When the police arrived, they found no body, only Roman's phone still recording. On it, a woman's voice whispered in a language that reversed itself when played backward. Slowed down, it became a single phrase. "We were inside before you believed in walls." The police ruled it suicide by disappearance. I know how absurd that sounds, but that's what they wrote. The report said he'd vanished voluntarily. They didn't see the footage from his father's security camera, at least not all of it. The tape showed Roman sitting in his living room at 3:03 a.m., staring at something across from him. Then slowly he stood and walked toward the wall. He didn't open a door or a window. He just walked forward until he wasn't there anymore. 2 weeks later, Paulina's grandmother died in her sleep. On her bedside table, the police found a small wooden cross carved roughly by hand, blackened at the tips, as if burned. When I heard the news, I drove back to Querétaro. I needed to see for myself. The cabin was still there, abandoned. The roof had caved in and vines crawled through the windows. In the center of the living room, someone or something had drawn another circle, this one larger, deeper. Symbols cut into the wood. In the middle sat a single item, a paper crucifix, half burned, hanging upside down from a nail. I wanted to leave immediately, but curiosity is its own curse. On the wall above the cross, scrawled in ash, were words in crude Latin, "Adoremus qui secidit." Let us worship the one who fell. It took me years to understand what that meant. In theology, there's an old belief, heretical of course, that the first fall wasn't Lucifer's but God's own descent into flesh. Creation, they said, was the original blasphemy, the infinite trapped in the mortal. The sect at San Bartolome had taken that idea and inverted it. They didn't want salvation, they wanted return, they wanted the divine to fall again, to rot, to become one of them. And if they couldn't bring heaven down, they would drag us up into the dark instead. That night, as I drove away from the cabin, I saw headlights behind me. 2, then 4, then 6. The road was narrow, the cliff on one side, the forest on the other. The cars followed without gaining, without falling back, their lights never flickering, too steady to be real. At a turn, I pulled over and killed my engine. The lights vanished. The silence afterward was immense, heavy, the kind that swallows the sound of your own breath. When I reached the main road, the gas station attendant looked at me strangely. "Long drive?" he asked. I nodded. He pointed to my back seat. "You left your candle burning," he said. I turned. There, resting upright on the seat, was a single white candle melted halfway down, its flame steady and tall. I drove for hours before I found the courage to stop. The candle was still burning. No wax had spilled, no smoke rose from it, and the flame remained perfect, motionless, untouched by wind or movement. I parked beside an abandoned toll booth, opened the car door, and watched the night swallow the sound of the highway. When I reached for the candle, the flame leaned toward me as though breathing. I hesitated. There was something written along the wax, carved by hand, crude and uneven. Latin again. "Sanguis meum lumen tuum est." My blood is your light. I dropped it. The flame didn't die. It landed upright in the dirt, burning as if nothing had happened. That's when I realized it wasn't consuming the wax. It was feeding on something else. The longer I looked, the weaker I felt, a slow hollowing behind my ribs. I left it there and drove without stopping until dawn. When the sun rose, I was already on the outskirts of Mexico City. The traffic, the noise, the smog, things I once hated felt like armor. Civilization was a kind of exorcism. I told myself I'd never return to the mountains, never answer strange calls, never open the door to anyone wearing black. For months, I managed to live as though it had all been a nightmare. I found work restoring minor historical buildings, safe, secular places. I kept to schedules, stayed among crowds, avoided churches. Yet even in the city, the signs began to follow. It started with mirrors. Whenever I passed one, my reflection lagged half a second behind. Then came the candles. No matter how many times I blew them out, they flickered back to life, trembling but unbroken. The final proof arrived on a Friday evening when my phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. "You left something burning," it said. The line went dead. That night I dreamed of Paulina standing at the foot of my bed, her hair wet, her eyes reflecting candlelight. She didn't speak, but when she turned her hands palm up, I saw that her wrists were black with soot, as if she'd been digging through ash. She reached toward me. Behind her, the man in black stood in silence, his face half-shadowed. I woke, gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. A smell of wax filled the room. The candle from the car sat on my nightstand, flame steady just as before. This time I didn't run. I sat and watched it burn. Hours passed, but the candle never shortened. Instead, it began to hum, a faint rhythmic vibration that grew louder until I recognized it. The same cadence, the same reversed prayer I had heard in San Bartolome's basement. I understood then. The flame was a door, a voice trying to return. In panic, I grabbed the candle and threw it out the window. It vanished into the night, and for a brief second I thought I was free. But when I turned back, the wall opposite my bed was covered in soot, shapes forming words I couldn't fully read except for one: Jair. 3 days later, my supervisor at work introduced the new department head. "This is Jair," he said, "transferred from Querétaro." He extended his hand, smiling politely. Same black shirt, same white skin. "You've been doing impressive work," he said. "It's good to finally meet you in person." His grip was cold, too cold. When he let go, I noticed his cufflink, silver engraved with a circle and an inverted cross, the same as the one found beside Roman's phone. I didn't breathe. For weeks after that, I avoided him as best I could. But Jair always seemed to appear wherever I went. The hallway, the elevator, the reflection in the glass of a meeting room. Sometimes he'd hum softly, the tune faintly reversed, and I'd feel my pulse stumble to match its rhythm. Then one afternoon, he leaned close enough for me to smell that same incense from the cellar in Puebla. "You shouldn't have left the light behind," he whispered. "It was meant for you." When I looked down, there was a white candle standing upright on my desk. No one else noticed it. That night, I stayed late, waiting for the office to empty. The city lights outside blurred into streaks through the rain. I reached for the candle, but before I could touch it, the door behind me clicked shut. "Don't blow it out," Jair said softly. His reflection hovered in the glass wall beside mine, though when I turned, the room was empty. I watched the flame tremble once, then steady. Its light began to stretch across the table, forming the outline of an inverted cross. And in that moment, I understood the truth my uncle had tried to tell me years ago. The sect never vanished. It didn't need the church anymore. It had found a new altar made of glass, concrete, and screens, and it was already inside. I left the office that night and never went back. But sometimes when I walk past tall buildings, I see candles burning behind darkened windows, their flames impossibly still. They are waiting for someone to look up, and I always do. It's been months since I left the city. I moved south to a small town where the streets end in dust and the nights smell like rain on stone. No one here knows my name. They think I'm just another stranger who came to forget something. Maybe they're right. But forgetting is not the same as being forgotten, and what follows me doesn't forget. Every night at the same hour, the church bells ring, though no one pulls the rope. The priest says it's the wind, but I know the rhythm. It's the same cadence, the same pattern as the prayer spoken backward in that basement years ago. 3 tones, a pause, 3 again, an inverted Ave Maria. I stopped going to Mass. I can't stand the smell of incense anymore. It's too much like the smoke from San Bartolome. Yet sometimes I stand outside the chapel door at dusk listening. I can't tell if the whispers come from inside or from the trees. When I first arrived, I rented a room from a widow named Elena. She was kind, devout, and never asked questions. The house smelled of rosemary and old paper. But after a week, she began leaving candles outside my door each morning, white, unlit, always with a small scratch along the wax. "What are these for?" I asked once. She smiled without meeting my eyes. "For the ones who dream with their eyes open." I wanted to ask more, but she walked away before I could. That night, I dreamed of her standing by my bed holding one of the candles. Her lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't hear. When she looked up, her eyes were bleeding wax. I woke gasping, the smell of smoke in my throat. The next morning, the candle from the dream was sitting on my table, half burned. I packed my bags, ready to leave, but when I opened the door, Yair was standing outside. Not in his black shirt this time. He wore a white one, spotless, as if mocking the light. "You've come far," he said, "but distance is only faith measured in kilometers." I tried to speak, but no sound came. My voice felt swallowed, like the air around him devoured everything alive. He stepped closer. "Do you still believe?" "I don't believe in anything," I managed. His smile widened, soft and pitiful. "Then you're almost one of us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, old and tarnished, engraved with the same inverted cross within a circle. He placed it on my palm. "Faith doesn't disappear," he said. "It inverts. Every prayer is just a question turned upside down." I threw the coin at his feet, but when it hit the ground, it didn't ring, it whispered. By the time I blinked, he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch watching the moon bleed through clouds. I told myself it was over, that maybe the sect only lived in memory, but as the wind rose, I heard chanting from somewhere beyond the fields. A long, slow murmur carried on the night air. I couldn't make out the words, yet every syllable pulled at something deep in me, something that remembered even when my mind refused to. I went inside and locked every door, but the chanting didn't fade. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. The lamp flickered, and for a moment the room filled with the smell of pine resin and burnt paper, the scent of the crucifix. When I looked down, I saw the coin Jair had given me lying on the table. I hadn't brought it inside. Its surface was hot to the touch. A shadow moved behind me, and a voice, familiar, patient, breathed into my ear. "Every church needs its rest. Do not disturb its peace." I turned, and there he was. The priest from San Bartolome, the one who had shouted, "Wait!" as I fled. His face was streaked with ash, but his eyes, God, his eyes were empty, not with blindness, but with understanding. "You left before the prayer was finished," he said. "I didn't belong there," I whispered. "No one belongs," he replied. "That's the beauty of it. Belief is not entry, it's surrender. He lifted his hand, and in his palm burned a small candle, its flame steady, its wax untouched. The world above thinks faith is ascent, he said, but the truth is fall. Always fall. The flame leaned toward me, and for an instant I saw shapes moving inside it, faces, countless faces melting into one another. Roman, Paulina, my uncle, all watching. I don't remember dropping to my knees, but I must have. The heat filled the room, pressing on my chest like hands. "What do you want from me?" I gasped. The priest smiled. "You already gave it to us." The light consumed everything. When I woke, it was morning. The room was cold. The coin was gone. But the table bore a single sentence carved into the wood, burned into the grain itself. Adoremus qui secidit. Let us worship the one who fell, and for the first time I understood. The cult wasn't about summoning demons or worshiping death. It was about the inversion of hope, the transformation of belief into despair. They weren't trying to destroy faith. They were teaching it another direction. Downward. Now I sit here writing, the candle beside me burning without wax. I know what it wants. I can feel the words forming in my mouth, heavy and warm. Maybe if I speak them, it will stop following me. But I've learned one thing since that night. Prayers once reversed never end. Erst, never. I've stopped pretending that the candlelight is only light. There's something breathing inside it. Every night it waits, patient and voiceless, until my thoughts begin to wander. Then the shadows start to move and the whispers return. Not around me this time, but through me, like air drawn backward through lungs that aren't my own. I tried to leave again. I made it as far as the bus station on the edge of town. The sky was bruised with thunderclouds, the ticket agent half asleep behind his glass. When I handed him my ID, he looked up with a start and said, "You already left." I told him that was impossible, but he turned the screen to show me a record of a ticket bought the night before, with my name, my seat number, my destination. Querétaro, paid in cash. The man behind me cleared his throat. I turned, black shirt, silver cufflinks, smile like the first crack of a coffin lid. I ran. The candle was waiting for me when I reached the house. It sat in the center of the floor, flame steady even though the windows were open and the storm was howling. The light pulsed with each breath I took, as if it were sinking to my heartbeat. And then, slowly, the flame began to lengthen, stretching upward until it became a column of fire, its color shifting from gold to white, to the sickly pale of moonlight through bone. From inside that column came a voice I recognized but could not name. Perhaps my own. Perhaps every voice I'd ever heard twisted into one. "You saw the fall," it said. "Now see what fell." The walls around me dissolved. I stood again in the crypt beneath San Bartolome, the air thick with wax and rot. The priest was there, face hollowed, holding his inverted cross. Around him knelt the others, their hoods trembling as they whispered the reversed prayer. But where the papier-mâché Christ had burned before, now something else hung from the ceiling. Not an image, not a sculpture, but a body. My own. It dangled upside down, eyes open, mouth mouthing the words the others spoke. Wax dripped from its fingertips. The voice continued, calm, instructional, like a teacher addressing a child. "Every believer builds a stairway upward, but the light you follow falls as it climbs. Each prayer that ascends must descend through another soul. You prayed, didn't you? You looked up, and so you became the answer." The body's chest split open. Inside, instead of organs, there was only fire. The same fire from the candle, alive, aware. The sound that came from it was not a scream, but a hymn in reverse, each note collapsing into the next until silence itself began to hum. I tried to move, to close my eyes, but the floor was gone. There was only the fall, endless, slow, luminous. And in that falling, I understood the creed that had haunted me for years. Adoremus qui cecidit. Worship is not praise, it's gravity. When I woke, I was back in my room. Morning light poured through the window, soft and harmless. The candle had melted completely into the shape of a cross, still smoking. Outside, the church bells rang 3 times. The exact rhythm of that backward prayer. I went to the chapel. I had to see. Inside, the pews were empty except for one figure kneeling near the altar. The widow, Doña Elena. She turned when she heard my steps, her eyes hollow and wet with wax. "You kept the light," she whispered. "Now you must keep the prayer." She held out her hands. In her palms burned 2 small flames, steady as breath. "Every story needs a witness," she said. "Every fall needs someone to tell it." I should have run. Instead, I reached out. The moment our hands touched, the fire passed to me. Cold, clean, final. Now I understand why they called it a sect and not a faith. A sect severs. It cuts you from the world above so you can see what lives beneath. And once you've seen it, you can't climb back. The candle beside me burns again, though I haven't lit it. Its flame leans toward these words as I write, reading them with me, approving. If you're hearing this, if you've listened this far, remember. The first step into belief isn't upward, it's a fall, and somewhere in the dark something is waiting to catch you. Adoremus qui succeedit.